Hello to you all. This is our season opening edition of INNERchamber Connections. My name is Andrew Chung. I'm the artistic director of INNERchamber, and today I've got with me two special people. I've got Heidi Sander, poet and dancer. Hello, Heidi.
Hello, thanks for having me, Andrew.
My pleasure. And we've got Ben Bolt Martin. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Hooray. So, people might not know Heidi as much, so I'm just going to read a little bit of her bio, just to embarrass you, Heidi. So, award-winning poet, Pushcart Prize nominee, and best-selling author Heidi Sanders' poems have appeared in literary journals, anthologies, and multiple artistic collaborations. She is the founder of Pathways to Poetry, a multimedia online program that helps emerging and established poets develop their writing, publish their poetry, and promote their work. Her award-winning poem, How We Live On, is now a short film that will be touring film festivals in 2023 and 24. Her latest poetry collection, Plant Your Words, is focused on environmental awareness, and her fourth poetry book will launch in 2023. A lot of poetry going on.
Yes.
That's fantastic. So for many years, Heidi, you've been an amazing supporter of INNERchamber, both as an audience member, and then we also collaborated once on a presentation involving readings from a book by Tim Cook. You probably remember. This was a
Yes.
Remembrance Day themed concert. What do you recall about that?
It was just a wonderful collaboration because it was for Remembrance Day. And, rather than just having a reading, I just thought it would be so nice to have music with it. And so we had, yes, Tim Campbell was doing the reading. It was a string quartet, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Shostakovich, Edgar, I'm not sure exactly
Yeah,
which
I remember
song.
Algar String Quartet. Is that right, Ben? And
That's
and
right. Yeah,
Shostakovich, the whole string quartet.
yeah, for sure.
And we had some veterans that we had invited as well, and they were in the front row. It was just a
Mm.
lovely tribute.
Yes, and you've always been you've got the collaborator's mindset. That is my mindset. Always
Mm.
thinking of ways to work together, or the way that different art forms can can heighten each other, I suppose. And now we get the chance to finally shine the light on your art, which is great. I for many years you've lifted others up in the pursuit of their art. There's all your work with the Stratford Writers Festival. It's been absolutely extraordinary. And I didn't know that you yourself were a writer, a poet, until the prize that you won. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've always been a writer and I focused a lot on travel writing for many decades, but I was always writing poetry. And when I moved to Stratford, I wanted to just elevate the literary arts, and that was the reason for the Writers' Festival. But it was actually during the pandemic when everything was shut down that I took all of my energies and just honed it toward my own writing, which I could do in the safety of my own home. So I wrote the poetry collection Forest in My Mind. And then there's a poem I wrote called How We Live On, and it won an international award. I spot
Amazing.
during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Amazing. And is that the kind of thing where you submit your poetry for consideration, or did they just pluck you out of the vast, world of
I said that one I submitted, but there's so many, I've been approached to be a part of, have a poem in an anthology. So it happens in many different ways, but that one I actually did submit. So it was a real surprise because you submit a poem and you almost forget about it. And then months later, suddenly there's an email that pops up and I wanted the award. It was quite a surprise.
so tell us where these poems came from. And these were all written within the last how many years?
So the poems in that particular collection of Forced My Mind, they were all written in honor of my mom. And it was really following the entire grief journey when she passed on. And so she passed on about 5 years ago. So I had written the poems during that time. But when I had that concentrated time during the pandemic, that's when I wrote a lot of the poems. It really gave me a chance to sit back and reflect, as many of us did during that time.
Mhm.
And so the poems, they start, it's really a journey of grief, and they start off very raw, the grief, loss, anger, and then it moves to hope and renewal and living with grief, really.
It's such a beautiful collection. It really, really is.
Mhm.
Um, so all of those poems, that collection were since the passing of your mom. So you said about 5 years ago, so 2017,
18,
18.
yeah.
Got it. So, fast forward a little bit, and then there was a book launch of this book in October 2021, and I was lucky enough to see a presentation of these poems. And so you already were thinking about matching this to music, and you had a good friend of yours, David Aliakis, and he had selected, or did you select together, piano pieces that interspersed with the poems? How did that go?
Well, that was an interesting collaborative process. And David originally had asked me if he could compose music, which he still wants to do for some of the poems. But because there was such a tight timeline for the book launch, he decided to take classical pieces already in existence and just adapt them to the poems. So we had quite a lot of conversations, and it was really moving to see how poetry is interpreted differently. So he read through the book, he selected poems that really impacted him, and then we talked about those. And it was so interesting to see what he saw in the poem versus what my intention was when I wrote it. So that's the part I love about collaboration. And then we talked about the music, and so he asked me, were there any special songs for particular poems, favorite songs of my mom. So I gave him quite a list that he worked with, and then he also has such a repertoire of songs just in his head that he selected certain ones, and I would send him an audio recording, and then he would send the music back, and we just collaborated that way. Again, it was sort of during part of there were the lockdowns continuously, so sometimes we were doing it remotely, but it worked well.
And this is for the launch of the poetry book, which doesn't come with like a accompanying CD. Well, what's a CD? And so, yeah, that collaborative mindset, it's always there. I just love the polish that you had on that it was a brunch. I was like, wow, this is an amazing
Mhm.
experience. And so, pretty soon we got talking thereafter, and I connected you with Ben, who you already know, of course. And Ben
Mhm.
is writing original music and as well doing arrangements of some pieces that already exist. Um, and what I found was that the poems they weren't exactly the same as what I heard on that magical brunch in October there, 2021. So how did the poems get selected for our presentation, and how did those differences come about, Ben?
Well, I mean, just read the book, and I mean, I think for the most part, we were in a similar space. We met. I read through the poetry a bunch of times, and then we met to talk about them, and we were in a similar space with what was interesting, what was sort of available as material for all the people we were going to have involved. Like there's 7 people involved in this, and so it becomes a bit of a different uh, animal, a different kind of event than the reading and music event would have been for the opening. So this is material that's I guess some of the more theatrical material in the anthology, the in the collection is what we ended up choosing. Material that sort of has um, a visual and dramatic component to it that I think really lends itself to the involvement of all the different artists that are going to be involved in the concert. So, and I think we kind of narrowed it down to pretty much the same poems that really grabbed our interest for something like this. So there's some material in there that's just seems really danceable, really visual, and there's some stuff in there that seems like it's going to be a really cool set of material to read sort of in a chorus fashion that all the musicians get involved in reading as well. And so there's just the material from the anthology that just feels like it lends itself to something that's just a little bit more immersive, I suppose, than rather than to be listened to, but to sort of be experienced.
Mm-hmm. And you've done arranging before for INNERchamber for a concert, involving involving short stories.
Right.
But poems are such a, much more condensed form. Is it a lot easier with poems, or is it
It's a different focus because when you're writing to short stories, the sort of signposts and the time limits are basically scoped out for you. So it's like there's about 30 seconds of reading here, so you need 30 seconds of music, and the story is 7 minutes long, so you need 7 minutes. The piece is going to be 7 minutes long, essentially. I mean, with a few adjustments. But with a poem, the whole thing would be very short if we just wrote music while there was poetry being read, because poems are very concise.
Yeah.
So I mean, unless it's Homer, I suppose. But the nature of this material was such that the actual words as they're being read take up very little time, and so it's actually a neat way. It's almost the inverse of writing underscoring for a story, because the poetry suggests, so a 20-second piece of idea from the poem might send me off on a minute and a half of music that sort of reflects and encapsulates the idea behind those words. And so it's sort of the same, but it's also in a way sort of inverted in the way that the words sort of send the music in a direction to sort of round out and shape and create shape to the idea in the poem.
Got it.
And if I can just say, I love that, Ben. When I heard the music, so I did the same thing. I would send an audio recording, then Ben sent it back with the music. And where you added space, it just opens up that element of discovery for the words. And it was just so well placed, and there was room for movement. It was really a magical process working with you on that.
Yeah, it's neat how poetry does that. Short stories are in essence creating their own boundaries in a lot of ways. Like they're creating their own. This is the story, and then you sort of comment. You can comment on it. But poetry, I think in general, when you sit down and experience a poem, the actual time spent reading the poem is a very limited amount of what the experience is. Right. A lot of what you experience with a poem is reading it, sitting about it, thinking about it, sort of digesting it for yourself, and then maybe coming back to the material again. So I think that the act of participating in poetry is that way, that it kind of creates space in your mind where your mind fills in the blanks and creates its own response to what you've just read. And that's sort of for me how the process of writing the music to go with the poetry kind of fleshed itself out. It was very much in the way that I respond to poetry in general, which is to sit and think and then, have it going through my head while I'm in the car or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you do end up living with the poem, right? And the words are there, and the music has these entry points and it makes it accessible, especially with that space you gave it. So I loved it. And then it's playing with words, right? Which and that was a brilliant concept that you had, Ben, when we were talking about some of the poems where the musicians are not only playing the words, but they will be performing some of them as well. So there's this interplay between the arts, but there is such a web of that happening in some of the pieces. I love it.
So there's a dance element to this that wasn't there at the onset. And I think, Heidi, when you mentioned, having a dancer or yourself doing movement, I didn't really think it was possible at Revival House because of, restrictions of space. But I think that we've carved out a nice little chunk of ground that you can work. And also we've got Bonnie Jordan on this concert. So and Bonnie right now is performing with me in Chicago. And it's kind of funny. We were thinking, okay, well, we need a dancer. So I got thinking, okay, well, what dancer are we going to ask? And I'm just sitting on my porch thinking about this. And then Bonnie walks by walking her dog. And as happens in Stratford, really talented people just walk by your field of
Mhm.
vision. And so we got talking, and it turned out that she had lost her mom last year, and we talked about this project, and she said, "Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. Can you connect me with Heidi?" And so you two hit it off, which is great.
Mhm.
And you've had great conversations. And so there's this dance element in there. Tell us a little bit about your conversations with Bonnie, Heidi.
Well, to me, like dance is poetry for the body, really. And so, yes, we have a small stage to answer that, but dance doesn't always have to be on a big stage. Sometimes, just as you can have a short poem, there can be dance with very small movements or even just choreographing in stillness, which can be really impactful. So, having the dance element, as you know, I love collaboration. So it's exciting. And when Ben and I were first talking, one point we said, well, what about adding dance in? Would that work? And so Ben liked the idea. And as you said, Ben, I think that shaped some of the decisions to, choose poems that would have a lot of movement elements and also write the music that way. So I've had a few rehearsals with Bonnie, and it's been an amazing collaboration in that way because, we share ideas, and it's also coming from a place of a shared experience, not only with dance, but also in losing our moms. And so really that the dance we're doing is a tribute to our moms as well. So having that combination is really, really powerful. And we've just been exploring that whole connection of music and words and how to express that in movement. Because it's interesting, poetry has a certain kind of language and expression through rhythm and style, and dance does as well. So combining those two is just, I find that those two arts really complement each other.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff. And just speaking with Bonnie about this, she's really excited, for this opportunity, and just the way to having an opportunity to express the loss of her mom and participate in this idea of this concert. Not your typical, fireworks, energetic season opener, but it's like a, warm embrace kind of
Mhm.
beginning to our season, I would say. So Bonnie will be singing one song as well. Ben,
Yeah.
that's The Glory of Love, is it?
Yeah, The Glory of Love from Beaches, something that was meaningful for Bonnie and her mom. Actually, I mean, going back however many years it is to Beaches, I mean, that's a meaningful um, movie to a lot of, I think, I mean, especially women. I think those relationships between women, whether it be, family or just friendships, I think that um, it's an interesting experience always to sort of move around that relationship, because clearly that's not something that I can have a part of. I have a relationship with my mother, but it's not the same, is it, for men with women in their lives? It's something it's a bit of a foreign country, I suppose, to experience for those of us who are not who don't have that specific sort of woman to woman relationship. And this song in particular, in the context that it fits in that movie, it's something to be observed that I can't really participate in, which is kind of cool.
Hmm. And then in the concert, we've got 7 poems of Heidi's that form the backbone of the presentation. 5 of them have music composed by yourself, and then we've also got music that stands on its own. And let me see what we've got. We've got Ravel's Pavan. We have Adoration by Florence Price, which is great. We had planned a Florence Price piano quintet as part of our season before Emily Hamper had to move
Mhm.
away to Calgary.
Yes.
So, oh my goodness. So it's nice to get a little bit of Florence Price in our season. And we've got a song by a piece by William Grant Still called Mother and Child, originally for violin and piano, and Ben will be arranging that for the ensemble. Yeah, well, this is great. What else do we want to talk about? You know, I would like to talk about using art as part of a process of grieving. I mean, three of us lost a parent within the last 5 years, but we've all lost something over across this pandemic, no doubt, whether it's just loss of habits or loss of a way of life or a loss of people. Um, yeah, what I'm just curious about what your thoughts are, Heidi. You've had a chance to express the loss of your mother through the poetry, now through performing. How is that different?
Interesting question. I think, when I find poetry and even, music and dance, all of those artistic expressions, they help find a thread when something is so devastating that you can't express it, or that it's almost unbearable. And through that creative process, it's cathartic and you find a way in. With poetry, for example, there's a lot of emotion expressed, there's a lot of imagery. And once you write something and you put it on the page, now you're offering it up to, the reader, for example, or just for the page to hold your feelings and your emotions. And then you can carry on or learn how to live with whatever loss you've had. But when it comes to performing it, it's interesting because as writers, we work in a very quiet space and write our work, and then it's published. We don't really have a sense of how it impacts the reader unless you receive feedback, which it's often really impactful for me when I find that a particular poem has helped someone through their grief process. But in general, when you perform it, it's making that personal connection, and it's offering your feelings to others to help them through the journey. And I find that personal expression it's in essence just the same as I was saying when you write it and put it on the page and let it carry those feelings for you. When you're performing it, you're really releasing it. Does that make sense?
Because the people are in the room with you, and so it's a real offering, whereas the initial artistic effort was maybe more a process for yourself. Like you weren't thinking,
Exactly.
oh, how are people going to think of this? How can this best help a person? This is a self-expression, a healing, part of a healing process for yourself. And then it's more of an offering. Yeah.
It is. That's a lovely way to put it. It is.
That's great.
And there's a vulnerability in that, right? And personal feelings. Like even when I wrote the poems, they were really for me. And I thought, well, okay, I'll share them. But there's a vulnerability in putting that out into a poetry collection.
For sure. Well, this is great. I think that gives people a good taste of what to expect for our concert, How We Live On. And this will be performed from Revival House on October 2nd, our season opener. Really looking forward to this. I know that all of the in-person tickets are sold out at this stage, but that's what live stream's for. So we've got live stream available as well as takeaway meals from our restaurant partner, Revival House. Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you so much, Ben, for the work and the care and the love you've put into this project. I look forward to meeting with the ensemble in just a few days to rehearse and put it all together. So thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.